Hi everyone, thanks very much for joining me. If you watched my last video on the free market, you will remember that we looked at the production process of a humble glasses case. And if you remember, we looked at how the free market worked with lots and lots of tiny markets with millions of people getting involved in the manufacture of that little product. We also looked to see whether or not this marvellous free market actually always works, and we know that sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it causes damages to society, pollution, etc., and therefore damages economic welfare overall. Okay, so we also then said that government could intervene and try and put this right. And sometimes when it does that, it works, sometimes it goes wrong. Okay, so the question really is, how are you going to show this diagrammatically? How are you going to show that in an essay in your examinations if you're doing an A-level economics exam? Okay, so here we go. So let's have a look at four of the markets, four of the hundreds and thousands of markets that are going to make up that product. Let's look first of all at the logging. The problem with the logging was that it could lead to deforestation. So how could we stop that? How could you as a government stop that? Well, what you could do, you could give a subsidy. You could give a little bit of money to the logging company so that it replants new trees where it has chopped down old ones. So in this particular case, it might give a subsidy to the logging company. And if it gives a subsidy to the logging company, it will reduce that logging company's cost of production, which in turn will lead to a shift in its supply curve to the right. The impact of this, of course, will be that the logging company will produce more, and it will produce it at a lower price. So there we go. So that is one way in which the government could intervene to try and deal with that market failure. Okay, so the logs have now been chopped and now they're being transported. They've been transported in trucks or ships or planes or whatever. So how can we discourage the use of a lot of this transport, which is going to result in excessive CO2 emissions? Well, what the government could do is impose a tax. Now, a tax is the opposite to a subsidy. It increases the cost of production. And if we increase the cost of production for the transport company, they will reduce the amount of material they will transport. So the supply curve will shift to the left. And the impact of this will be a reduction in the quantity moved and an increase in the price of moving it. But what we've done is reduce the level of transport, reduce CO2 emissions, dealt with that market failure up to a point at least. Okay, so it's now being transported, it's arrived at the factory. Factory, in order to ensure that their workers are not being exploited and that and they're being paid a reasonable wage and good terms and conditions, we could legislate, we could pass laws saying that employers must provide a minimum wage of a certain amount, good terms and conditions. If that happens, that's going to increase the cost of production for the manufacturing company. And consequently, rather like the tax, if you increase their cost of production, it's going to reduce the amount that they're going to supply. So their supply will shift to the left, like so. The impact of this would be to increase the price of the product to P2 and reduce the quantity being produced to Q2. Okay, so although that's happened, the number of people who are being employed in that industry are now being paid a fair wage and fair terms, being given fair terms of employment, and so we've dealt with that externality also. Now it comes into the shop. It may be that the government says, well, look, let's stop people buying such an eco-unfriendly product as this. Let's encourage people to buy something else, buy an eco-friendly glasses case, perhaps made of I don't know, something biodegradable, which is better than using this. So in order to do this, it could do this in many ways. So nudge theory means that we just imply and we try and get people to perhaps buy an alternative that's better, make it easier for them, make the alternative nicer, better looking. In other words, improve the choice architecture. That's the terminology for making it more attractive, making it easier, and therefore more likely to be bought instead. If that was to happen, then the demand for this rather eco-unfriendly glasses case would fall. And if that happened, then the demand curve would shift to the left. And if that happened, the quantity bought would go down to Q2 and the price would come down also. So there we go. So in diagrams, we can show how the government can intervene in all the small markets. So we've shown the small markets in black. In red, you can see how the government can intervene to try and eliminate the market failure. Of course, it could result in government failure. So for example, because we've increased cost of production here, and we've reduced the demand here, and because we've increased cost of production here, perhaps in these markets, there may be greater unemployment. So people may have to be laid off work. It may well be in the logging, for example, that perhaps the wrong type of trees are replanted, even though we've given that subsidy. All those things are what we call government failure, and they are depicted in the diagrams here. So, hope that's been useful. We talked about the general theory in the previous video. In this one, how to show it with diagrams. Thanks for joining me. I hope you found that useful. Bye bye for now.